Good day, and welcome to yet another one of our Answers Weekly Wraps. This week we'll discuss three issues as per normal. The first is going to be the Bank of Japan. The next is going to be developments in Davos. And finally, we're going to look at the European consumer and kind of developments happening there at the moment. So the first thing is the Bank of Japan. I've talked about this in the past. The Japanese have the biggest debt in the world. They are unable to raise interest rates significantly because it's caused trouble for their ability to basically service that debt. Which basically means that despite the fact that the UK, the US, Europe all raised interest rates recently, the Japanese have done pretty much nothing, and they can't do anything, like I said, because of the restrictions they have. What this has meant is that it's much more attractive to be basically buying bonds elsewhere in the world than buying bonds in Japan, because you're getting nothing for your return at the moment. For your investment at the moment, there's no return coming for your investment at the moment. Now, this obviously is a problem and means that people don't want to be buying Japanese bonds, which means the central bankers will step in and basically make up the difference. So the central bank has been a huge purchaser of bonds at the moment, and effectively is buying the majority, like the vast majority, of new issuances coming out at the moment. This obviously cannot continue. This is well known in economic circles. If you keep on doing this, after a while, there's going to be issues around the stability of your economy, the stability of your currency, etc. But right now, the Japanese are willing to do that. They're willing to push this as hard as they can. They are hoping, obviously, that interest rates fall as inflation falls globally, and they can get back to basically not being so out of sync with the rest of the world. Fortunately for them, we have seen movements in interest rates. We saw, for instance, the US PPI come in lower than expected. The Germans are saying that they think that inflation has already peaked. That all means that interest rates are going to be under probably after like the near term, the short term, probably coming under some pressure. We could be seeing rate cuts as early as this year in the US, for instance. But if that does not happen, or if there is a bit of a blow up in the market, it could cause a lot of instability in the global economy. The Japanese, despite falling down from the second largest economy in the world, are still the third largest economy in the world. They have a massive bond market. Many financial institutions are invested in them, and any kind of massive disruption there could cause a global situation that's quite negative. But like I said, right now, the Bank of Japan did nothing. Because Japanese yen did strengthen a little bit after we saw first the PPI number come out, but when the news initially came out that they did nothing, we saw a bit of a weakening coming through in the Japanese currency. And like I said, unless we see a real swift turnaround in inflation and interest rates, I'm very nervous about that economy. Next, looking at Davos. As you know, Davos is just shorthand for a conference that occurs once a year where the rich and powerful of the world get together. The World Economic Forum basically invites people from around the world to come across and discuss solutions to the global problems. It's basically been termed a conference for the rulers of the world, for the elites of the world, however you want to define it. And look, there's never going to be any huge revelation about what's happening there. You're not going to see, for instance, a huge policy announcement being developed there that wasn't broadcast well in advance. But what you are going to be seeing is at least what they're focusing on, what they're talking about. Interesting thing they're still talking about is climate change. Despite the fact that we've seen a massive pullback in climate change commitments in Europe, for instance, because of the situation in Russia and the lack of energy, climate change remains a huge talking point in Davos. We saw Greta Thunberg, the teenage activist turn up there. Al Gore made quite a viral speech where he talked about the fact that the amount of heat energy released in the world in excess of the norm due to global warming is something like 600,000 Hiroshima bombs a day. All these factors basically indicate that there's still a elite consensus around ESG. So in terms of some of the pushback we've seen, for instance, places like Florida and Texas around ESG by the Republican Party especially, and populists around the world, quite frankly, are getting into this anti-ESG kind of mindset. ESG remains a popular thing among the people of Davos, and remember, the Davos elites are not just themselves. They often represent huge funds. They represent huge, pools of money, even public money, and what they basically are focusing on is going to be what's that money going to be focusing on as well. So if they still talk about ESG, they're still focusing on ESG. ESG remains, an interesting, asset class for investors. And now finally, we look at what's happening with regards to consumers in Europe. There's two main things to look at. Firstly is UK retail sales, and then this massive strike action that's happening right now in France. So UK retail sales came in lower than expected. They expected a slight improvement, about 0.5%. They got about a 1% drop. That is obviously a bit of a disappointment. It does show that the cost of living, problems are making a real impact on terms of people's spending and spending habits. Yes, the European Union, Europe as a whole, had a milder winter than had been anticipated. That meant that energy prices weren't as debilitating as had been feared. That being said, other factors are still in play and the consumer is still under pressure. And that brings us to what's happening in France at the moment. The French have a huge strike action happening right now because of Emmanuel Macron's decision or attempt to raise the retirement age. The French have a very low retirement age, as we all know, and basically, even though the raise is not going to bring them all the way back to where the US or South Africa is going to be at 65, it's getting close to there. And this is obviously hitting with a lot of pushback from the French unions, especially. Now, unions obviously are trying to fight for less work and more pay for their workers. One of their big achievements in France has been the fact that they are looking at reasonably low retirement ages and reasonably high pensions. Now, the problem with that is that if people retire young and are being paid a huge amount of money, that means that we are having a financial system where you're putting less money in because you're retiring quite young, and you're at the same time basically getting a large amount of money because, again, you're retiring young, so you're getting the money for longer, but also the amount of money you're getting is quite large. So with regards to the French system, it's unstable. It's not going to be able to survive in the current environment, and we do need to be seeing some kind of rebalancing there. Either dropping in the amount of people get for retirement or increasing the age. And I think dropping the retirement amount they get is going to be difficult, so the age increase has to be done. Emmanuel Macron is just the latest of these French prime ministers to try to do this. It's not being successful so far. The amount of pushback they're getting usually is enough to stop the politicians moving forward, causing the problem to snowball and become more of an issue later on, and even more urgent in a perverse way. I don't know if he'll be able to push this through. He's not a very strong prime minister. He's got some serious challenges, especially from the right wing in France. If he tries to push through policies that are very, very unpopular with the populace, I think he's going to find himself in a very precarious situation politically. Yes, he just won an election, but it wasn't anywhere near as large as you would normally do. What happens in France is basically you have a first round of elections in which he usually finishes first, but not by a lot. But then the second round is between him and the closest runner-up, which is usually an extremist left-wing or extremist right-wing. The last couple of elections have been extremist right-wing. And then the French populace says, okay, it's either Emmanuel Macron, who we don't really like, but kind of is much better than this extremist, and therefore he wins a substantial second-round victory. He won a victory again in the second round, but the margin was not as large as one would expect from the past. And so I do think that a weak premise like this, trying to push through this kind of policy is going to be quite, difficult. And I think that's something that we need to look at going forward. The rise of populism in France, the rise of more and more issues around, for instance, the cost of living difficulties that people are facing, and expect more turbulence to come through from that region. Okay, that's me for the week. I look forward to speaking to you guys again next week, and have a great weekend. Cheers.